Let's get ready to rumble!
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Down goes Frazier! Down goes
Frazier! It's time! You're listening to New Mexico's only mixed martial arts and boxing podcast, The Low Blow, on AtomCombatSports.com and Fight Fans Radio.
It is episode 184 of The Low Blow on USCombatSports.com, SouthwestFight.com, and Fight Fans Radio. I am Justin Goodrum, joined by Jorge Hernandez. What's up, man?
Not much. Just trying to kill him like Terrio.
Did you? Are you running from your bookie after the NCAA tournament bracket?
Oh my God! I am glad I gave up betting, Jay, because I am absolutely done. Wichita State, I had in my championship. I was a believer. Kentucky played the best game of the year for them.
Yeah.
And here I am, Jay, on the air with you.
You're like me with Creighton, because I was a believer in Dougie Fresh, Doug McDermott, and he proved me wrong. I know your pain, definitely. On today's show, pretty short show, but we do have some audio, some breaking news audio. Jorge conducted an interview with Holly Holm at our open workout a couple of days ago. She addresses her upcoming fight next week and, of course, all the UFC rumors. So we're going to post that interview at the end of tonight's show, so you'll be able to hear that. And we're going to break down, some people are calling it a fight of the year between Dan Henderson and Shogun Rua. We'll discuss that as well. A pretty noteworthy result, Dan Henderson coming from behind, so we'll discuss that. Of course, you can get in touch with the show always through social media. Always starts with Facebook, facebook.com/lowblowpodcast. Also, we're available through email, lowblow505@gmail.com, and on Twitter, @thelowblow. Also, we're available to listen to on Stitcher Radio, Spreaker, and on iTunes. And, of course, Fight Fans Radio, always available on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Ustream. So, man, I guess there's a lot of news in terms of a lot of fights being made. And I guess before we get to some of the big fights made for the Albuquerque UFC Fight Night, some fights being made in the UFC welterweight division for UFC 174, starting off with Rory McDonald and Tyron Woodley. This is a very interesting fight considering both guys are coming off wins. Rory McDonald considered the heir apparent to the welterweight division. Now he has a chance to really earn himself a title shot by defeating Tyron Woodley, considering that Woodley defeated Carlos Condit. I guess I want to get your thoughts on this fight, Jorge, but there is some breaking news that happened right before we got on the air. George St. Pierre, even though he's been on this hiatus, this break, this siesta, maybe what you want to phrase it, I guess he's been training still. And from training, I guess he suffered a major injury. He tore his left ACL. This is from George St. Pierre's training, George St. Pierre's Twitter account, tore my left ACL in training, surgery in a few days, rehab, pain, hard work, no shortcuts. I'll be back at 100%. Thanks for all the support. So, I guess in terms of this entire welterweight division, in terms of Rory McDonald living up to his potential that, yourself and I think he has, do you think this is his division to take? George St. Pierre's hurt, and his mind's not really into fighting anymore. This is really McDonald's chance to establish himself as the number one top dog, don't you think?
It definitely is his chance, but he's going to have one hell of a time if and when obviously he does take on Woodley, who I think out of all MMA, he's the last guy people want to fight right now, just because of how hot he currently is. Sure. But as far as Rory, this is definitely his chance with his, I guess, mentor and his one of his best friends there in the division, who's always contending there year after year. And you and I have both talked that who knows if Rory McDonald will ever be champion, just because GSP will always be challenging. But, just for the sake, as an example here, we didn't know when and if George St. Pierre was going to come back. We definitely know now that he'll be out anywhere between 7 and 9 months. So if between that time frame, Rory beats Woodley and then challenges whoever the champion is at that time, Hendricks at this point, that can definitely be done. That's more than enough time as long as he doesn't get hurt, knock on wood for him. it's his division to take, as you mentioned. But it's just unfortunate that he's taking on Woodley, who, of the next guys here, of the top 15 guys, I think one of the two of them will eventually become champion, especially during this time that both Carlos Condit and George St. Pierre are out.
Maybe it's a blessing in disguise for George St. Pierre. Now, the injuries suck, and that certainly ruins your progression as a fighter. I think that's a huge negative. But, now people won't be bugging about George St. Pierre when he's coming back because he's hurt. I mean, it's nothing. He tore his ACL. He can't return. So that's a really good excuse for him just to say he's hurt, and then once he rehabs 100%, he'll address a comeback. But for now, I mean, I think it's good for him that he doesn't have to answer questions about when he's going to return to the UFC, and it'll give guys, somebody like Johnny Hendricks, if he does go on to defeat whoever the winner of this fight, Rory McDonald and Tyron Woodley, and if he's able to rehab from his bicep injury, by the time George St. Pierre does return, you'll have an established welterweight champion as opposed to when is George St. Pierre coming back. Now it's really Johnny Hendricks' division to lose here. There's really no pressure of George St. Pierre, so there's no excuses. So it's really, I think it's a blessing in disguise for the UFC and for George St. Pierre, even though it's a terrible injury.
Now let's talk about this fight that MMA Junkie first broke about, McDonald and Tyron Woodley fighting. It's supposed to take place at UFC 174. I guess relatively a quick turnaround for Woodley. I mean, how much is a disadvantage is Woodley here that the fight's going to take place in McDonald's country of Canada?
I don't think it's too much of an advantage for McDonald. I don't think he's well beloved like George St. Pierre, but maybe that will change as maybe the Canadian media will look for a new kind of combat sports star in Rory McDonald. I think with the danger in this fight is McDonald underestimating Woodley. Because if you think about the Carlos Condit fight, you can easily say, especially because Rory McDonald, I mean, he went through life and death trying to beat Carlos Condit. When he had the victory, Carlos snatched it away. So in Rory McDonald's eyes, you could say, the whole Carlos Condit fight was a fluke. Even though Woodley was dominating the first round, Carlos Condit could have come back. And with McDonald, he underestimated Robbie Lawler. You saw what happened. Even with the Demian Maia fight, that was a struggle for him in that one somewhat. So when he's squaring off against Woodley, I would favor Woodley in this fight. Woodley seems hungrier. He seems like you were saying, Jorge, last week, blowing up Dana White's phone, blowing up the UFC for a title shot. He seems the one that's been angling to be in the title mix as opposed to Roy McDonald, who's been kind of already declared, the chosen one, so to speak, kind of like LeBron James when he was in high school. It's kind of that same thing. So for Woodley, I would almost declare him the favorite. I mean, he really has nothing to lose. If he loses against Roy McDonald, he lost to, the heir apparent, and Woodley, fights the other guys in the welterweight mix. So for Woodley, I don't see, there's really no pressure on him, honestly, if he loses, unless he gets embarrassed by McDonald. But if the fight's competitive, I think Woodley has a lot to be, excited for, and really he's fighting with no strings attached.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying. I guess, I know we eventually will probably go into our 2 rounds. I guess I'll kind of use mine and throw a curveball here at you. Sure. You mentioned that Rory McDonald is, that Canada's looking for their next combat sports star, and I'm glad you just didn't say MMA, because right now, I think Canada, ever, and maybe, ever meaning in the past or maybe in the future, this might be the prime in their combat sports. You got guys in boxing like John Pascal, Lucien Boutte, Adonis Stevenson, GSP, obviously in MMA, and Rory McDonald. I mean, you're at the height of combat sports, as high as it gets for a country specifically, with all these, champions that we mentioned and possible future champion, and Rory McDonald. What do you think, this is a random question, but what do you think Rory falls in the mix out of all those guys? Do you think he's maybe third in that list, maybe behind like Adonis Stevenson or Jan Pascal, as far as the popularity of MMA fighter? Or excuse me, combat sports fighter, excuse me?
Sure. It's okay, because really none of them had that big, correct me if I'm wrong, that big kind of landmark fight. Like, with John Pascal, maybe when he fought Bernard Hopkins, and of course, when he fought Lucien Boutte. Yeah. But maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jorge, in terms of media buzz, I don't think that was at the height compared to George St. Pierre, Matt Serra. And maybe that's just because I followed it way more closely when, you saw George St. Pierre all over the different media outlets. That was, I believe, the first MMA event in Montreal, or if not, at least the first one where George St. Pierre was the headliner. I just remember that was his comeback fight. He beat Josh Koscheck in. He faced off against Matt Serra. So much hype surrounding that fight. Funny side note, you can go and listen to Joe Rogan's podcast. He had Matt Serra on there. And Matt Serra was discussing how he was really banged up with his back problems. But besides that point, anyway, the point is that with George St. Pierre, it just seemed like he was poised to become this big combat sports star. MMA has just blown up back then, just gotten popular. It's kind of the flavor of the month. George St. Pierre is a nice-looking guy. He's from Montreal. And you mentioned Jorge. I remember you discussing Lucian Bute, and not Lucian Bute, but Jean Pascal and Adonis Stevenson. Those guys aren't native Canadians, correct?
Nope, they're not. They're both Haitian.
Yeah, so with George, he's from Canada. I mean, you take a look. We talked pro wrestling a bunch on this show. Bret Hart was a national hero there. And really, you think about it, in combat sports, you have to put pro wrestling in that kind of category. Really, the Hart family is kind of the most known combat sports commodity in Canada prior to George St. Pierre. You think about it in terms of being a national hero. And since Bret Hart, George St. Pierre took on that mantle because he's fighting in a quote-unquote real sport. So with Roy McDonald, I think it'll be easier for him to become a star. He trains at the same gym as George St. Pierre. They're teammates. He's a nice-looking guy. He's from Canada. I just think it's going to take that blockbuster fight for him to kind of transcend. We'll see what happens with Adonis Stevenson and John Pascal. But for now, I think Roy McDonald has the more earning potential. But, he's lost before. I mean, if he loses again, that could be out the window.
On a scale from 1 to 10, rate this fight between McDonald and Woodley.
Oh, I like this fight a lot. I rated an 8. I think it depends if Roy McDonald shows up. If he's mediocre, I can see him getting smashed by Woodley. You saw how heavy he punched Carlos Condit, and Condit has an awesome chin. So with McDonald, if Woodley is just hungrier and comes out of the gates, I can see this being kind of a one-sided beatdown, to be honest. But if Roy McDonald comes in shape and takes Woodley seriously, I think it could really be a kind of underrated fight of the year contender, but we'll see.
Do we know what the main event is? Is this going to be the main event for that card? It's a little strange for me if it's not a championship fight. I'm looking at 174, and they have guys that would build an undercard right now. So, as of right now, this is the main event.
Now, there's so many USCs, but no, is this the
174 is what I thought I heard about this fight.
Oh, this is in Vancouver. Since this is in Vancouver, this will probably be the main event, in my estimation, because this is right after the UFC Fight Night. This is probably, this is right before Weidman Machida, which that's the July card. That's the International Fight Week card, where supposed to be one of the biggest cards of the year. I don't see Ronda fighting on this card. The champions have been hurt. It's in Canada. You loaded with a bunch of Canadians.
Is this a pay-per-view worthy card, though? If they're the main event, I don't think so. Man.
I don't think it is.
It's unfortunate because
it's still pretty early, but no.
It is. This is nonetheless, this is an excellent co-main event fight. As far as the main event, it's okay, but I definitely don't think it should be. And now I'm going to go ahead and move along, Jay, and something I'm pretty excited about. Just because it's rare to see. We're talking about pay-per-view. We'll switch to sports. Pay-per-view boxing cards have, I guess, other superstars besides the two guys in the main event. And we all know May 3rd, Floyd Mayweather is taking on Marcos Maidana, but the co-main event is a fight that a lot of people are excited about. Amir Khan is set to return, and he's going to be facing a very dangerous Luis Collazo on that undercard. The fight is supposed to take place at 140 pounds. Or I hope 147, I beg your pardon. It's likely going to be at welterweight now with Amir Khan moving up. Luis Collazo, for people who don't know, guys, 35-5, 32 years old. He's on a 4-fight win streak. He probably most known recently for his last fight. A second-round stoppage of Victor Ortiz. Victor Ortiz was supposed to have a big comeback here, and Luis Collazo ruined all those plans by stopping him in the second round of their fight with a nice combination, ending it with a straight punch right to his jaw and dropping him. So I mean, we're in the days now where Floyd and Manny Pacquiao are going to be on the card. They're going to take up 98% of what the guys get paid on that card. So It's great to see that this card is decently being built up. Amir Khan and Luis Collazo, pretty good fight, rated 8.5 out of 10, I think. Another fight on here, I'm not sure if you noticed this week, but Adrian Broner is going to be placed on this card as well. He's taking on Carlos Molina. Now people don't get confused. This is Carlos Molina, the light welterweight, not the 154-pound champion that was in jail in the last main pay-per-view card, and obviously the champion wasn't able to defend his title because in jail. So the other Carlos Molina, who's 17-1, is coming off of an actual loss to Amir Khan. So hopefully down the line, if an Amir Khan versus Adrian Broner fight were to happen, I think that'd be something that we'd probably all like to see.
Very entertaining and lots of trash talk. Do you think so? With Adrian Broner on this card, under a card with Floyd Mayweather, how much pressure is on him? If he loses, would you see Floyd Mayweather kind of discontinuing his kind of they're not really teammates, they're friends, kind of discontinuing his association with Adrian Broner? I mean, how much do you think Floyd Mayweather will really ride or die with Broner if he loses this fight?
Well, I mean, we've seen this happen with Floyd. Floyd, for people who haven't noticed any local shows in Las Vegas, he's usually there with some of his fighters. Jayon Love, who's also on this undercard, he's coming off of a loss. And, because he's part of the money team, he's going to ride out his contract, and Floyd is going to continue to support these guys. Even in post-fight interviews with Floyd after his guys lose, obviously he's not fighting that evening, he's just there as a spectator, he's still very positive. He's all, these guys are going to take it as a learning experience. And I think that goes to Floyd's, maturity and knowing that he's a promoter and he can't just bash on his own guys. So if Adrian Broner were to lose this, it would be huge. But I don't think Floyd Mayweather would jump ship, especially because Carlos Molina, he's 17-1, but only has 7 KOs. There's not a chance in hell that Adrian Broner gets knocked out in this fight.
It's pretty much a rehab fight.
It's a typical boxing bounce back fight. And as of right now, I don't know, this might surprise you, but Adrian Broner is actually lined up as the first fight of that evening on the pay-per-view card.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Big demotion. Relegated.
It is.
Relegated is what they would call it in soccer in Europe when you get dropped down to the minors.
Correct. Real quickly, it looks like there's been plenty of fights made for this UFC Fight Night card, and so far, so good. Can't really complain. Looks like John Dobson is taking on John Moraga, two guys that fought for the flyweight title. Both these guys set to battle each other on this card, and you said Sergio Pettis is also going to be on this card as well?
Correct. Sergio Pettis is supposed to actually face off in this fight. I can't recall right now who she's actually supposed to take. Yoatzin Mesa. He's a fighter out of Arizona, actually. The reason I remembered his name is because he's actually fought a few guys locally. Most recently, Andres Quintana, who's a pretty good guy out of the Rio Rancho area. That's where he trains. So Yoatzin Mesa, he's known locally to some guys, and Yoatzin actually lost to Andres Quintana the time they fought. So nonetheless, pretty good fight for Sergio Pettis, especially since Yoatzin Mesa has lost 2 of his last 3 fights. So I don't know. It's the card, as you mentioned. It's pretty decent as it is right now. As of right now, I think it's a solid B card. There are rumors that maybe 1 or 2 more native Albuquerqueans or New Mexicans are going to be on this card. I was actually interested in hoping that they would put Joseph Benavides on this card just because he did grow up in Las Cruces in southern New Mexico. A fight between him and Dodson. That would have divided the state here a little bit.
That would have been a main event.
North and South.
Honestly.
Yeah, it would have definitely been a main event, but it's rare. To be honest, it's rare. When's the last time you remember the UFC having a number 1 and a number 2 guy face? It's usually the number 1 guy against the number 4 guy, or the 2 against the 3. It's never the top 2 guys. I think the UFC, has some insurance, if you will, I guess, for just an example here, where they do save the top 2 guys and not have them fight one another. But nonetheless, Sergio Pettis, as of right now, he's the lead-in to the co-main event, which, of course, co-main event is John Dodson versus John Moraga. We all knew that a local guy would be on this card. We all knew, or thought at least, that it would be John Dodson, and here he is against a top 5 guy in his hometown. He's a native Albuquerquean. He went to high school in Moriarty High, which is about 45 minutes outside of Albuquerque. But nonetheless, I was excited and happy to hear that he was going to be put on the card.
Mm-hmm. And it looks. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say. I was going to mention. You're going to go into this Twitter beef between Main Events and Showtime's. I'm trying to get his name here.
Steven Espinoza.
Yes.
So Steven Espinoza.
Yeah.
So Steven Espinoza is apparently in a Twitter beef with Kathy Duva of Main Events. Main Events is, I guess, a second tier type of promotion, but Kathy Duva was not shy about sharing your feelings about Adonis Stevenson, who actually made the move against the boxer we've been talking about here from Canada, over to Showtime. So he left HBO, go over to Showtime, and Main Events feels that Adonis Stevenson is ducking her fighter Sergey Kovalev. Kovalev, like I told you off air, he is a beast. This guy is strong, and for people to say that Adonis Stevenson is ducking anybody, I don't think that's the case. He's making a move, and Al Heyman is the advisor to Adonis Stevenson. Most of his guys have left HBO and are now fighting for Showtime. So, could you really see this as a ducking situation? Not really, just because Al Heyman no longer has the relationship that he had with HBO in the past. But Showtime sports boss Steven Espinoza got into a spat with, Kathy Duva, and, they exchanged, their issues, and, the fight eventually was dead. The Twitter beef, if people want to read it, it's up online. Bad Lift Hook has it as well. But Steven Espinoza, he's a hardcore dude. Guy, people don't know, but he's actually born and raised out of El Paso, so he's a Southwestern guy, but he doesn't take no crap from anybody. He's been sports director at HBO, or at least had a top position there, and now he's at Showtime. So he's not going to let some second and third tier promotion walk all over him, Jay, no matter how much. If you follow Steven Espinoza on Twitter, he is freaking hilarious. He'll have Friday references on there. He'll have a lot of just like urban references that people could really appreciate, and I love it. From the old school Hispanic movies to the more recent black films. He is a funny guy.
That's funny. Can you give some reference to what is Main Events? If you can just give a quick history. I'm sure you take a look at the big promotions in boxing. Top Rank, Golden Boy, Dan Goosen, Lou DiBella. I guess Main Events is kind of way lower on that, right?
They are. They'd have a second or tier. Lou Duva, who used to be a trainer and manager, kind of helped start all this with his family. So Main Events has been around, I'd say maybe about 20 years or so. They previously had, a relationship with Don King, and, Don King, as we all know, that he fell off a little bit. And, along with that, anyone who's been really in partnership with them hasn't really been able to develop. So we've seen this out of, Main Events, unfortunately, that they haven't really developed a whole lot. And it's unfortunate, just because you hate to see, because in a way what we see in boxing is it's weird to say, but almost two monopolies, if that makes sense. You got Top Rank and Golden Boy, and they're on two opposing channels. So it's just,
sure,
you're just all over the place. But just to give you some fighters that Main Events actually has, Steve Cunningham, who's a pretty good cruiserweight. He's fun to watch. He's not a champion right now. Thomas Adamek, who's another guy. Of course, he's previously won heavyweight titles before. And from then on, you have a lot of other European fighters. Their best fighter out of that stable is Sergey Kovalev, who fights this weekend on HBO. If you guys haven't seen him fight before, he's a beast. 23 wins with 21 KOs. He's not no one to joke around. So, nonetheless, they have a very, very small stable of guys, middle of the pack guys that, you hope will eventually become world champion. But as far as right now, Kovalev is the only world champion that they currently have. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, looks like we were talking about injuries earlier. It continues to happen with welterweight champion Chris Weidman. He'll undergo surgery on both his knees. Now, get this. This injury's been a lingering issue since Weidman's high school days. According to Weidman, this problem would occur with his lateral meniscus about 2 times a week over the years, lasting upwards to 10 to 15 minutes in terms of pain. Now, basically, this instance reoccurred a bunch of times. He went to the doctor and he stated that he'll undergo surgery to clean up a meniscal tear in his right knee. And looks like he's going to have surgery on the other knee too. He expects a 4-week rehabilitation period before he can return to active training, although he'll be able to walk out of surgery under his own power. Very interesting to see if he'll be able to be even ready for the July main event. He was supposed to be a main event for UFC 173. That got moved. Of course, he kept his original opponent with Lyoto Machida. But to me, I don't know if he's going to even be ready for his fight in July. I mean, that's still kind of a real quick turnaround time for surgery on both knees. Especially a problem that been lingering since his wrestling days in high school. This is not really, even though it's minor surgery on both knees, it's still surgery, and still it's going to take some rehab time against a very tricky fighter in Lyoto Machida. So I'm not really optimistic if he even returns for UFC, I guess, 175.
Do we have another interim championship for this, Jay? Do you think Weidman would be out that long?
That's a good question. No. I would see if he can't make the July date, pushing this fight back again, to like August, September, and pull out some kind of miracle, get Ron, just pay Ronda some money and have her fight in July. Yeah. I think that's kind of your best bet.
Yeah. And one more thing, I wanted to visit just main events because I want to make sure they give them the respect that they do. Obviously, they're not one of the top players, but again, I think I said they've been around like 25 years. They've actually been around about 30 years, but there were three main fights that they actually did, and it kind of flew under the radar just because the promoters back in the 80s and 90s didn't put themselves out there as much as they did in the 90s, and now the way they do now, they make sure their name is out in front. But a few of the main fights that they actually did promote, and this is how long they haven't really been too big of a player. In 2002, they did the Lennox Lewis-Mike Tyson. That was one of the biggest fights that they did. In 83, they did the rematch between Alexis Arguello and Aaron Pryor. Another huge fight that actually took place. But again, we're talking nearly 30 years ago that these actually went down. And another one, which was probably their biggest, meaning star power. But then again, star power, the Tyson and Lewis is pretty big, but Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns in 1981 was the first major one they did. So they were a player, but it's been years since they had been considered as one of the not necessarily top promoters, but nearing the top.
Sure.
So there was another one there. As far as guys that used to be on the top, David Haye, again heavyweight out of England, is leaning toward retirement again. So there were a few interviews where David Haye he said he'd be willing to come back to the sport, but it sounds like he's more leaning on actually leaving. So the guy, hasn't fought in top competition since he fought Vladimir Klitschko in July of 2011. If you remember, he fought Derek Chisora in 2012 in a very lackluster fight. But out of the actual retirement, David Haye did say that he'd love to fight again, but maybe his body is telling him to call it a day, and he wasn't sure. So what he eventually
means.
Eventually what he says, like most fighters, I think at his age and the time he gets to the fight, is that the body wears out on him. And then he talks about his bicep. When your bicep detaches from your shoulder and your arm sort of rolls down, your body is telling you it's enough, close quote. And we hear this from a lot of fighters, not just fighters, but a lot of athletes. You hear guys in basketball and even football just say that, the body just can't keep up with the mind, and that's when it's time to go. And, David Haye only, I think he's about 33 years old. Record was 26-2. He made his noise in the past 3 years and was at the top of the boxing world in England, as far as England. So, if he does decide to call it a career, I mean, he gave it a run for it and was world champion in a couple of different holding a couple of different titles. So nonetheless, I mean, obviously his highlight of his career comes with that fight with Vladimir Klitschko in Germany, where 50,000 people showed up to watch them fight. So even if it is retirement, I wasn't his biggest fan, but could you consider his career a success? Yeah, especially by British boxing standards.
Agreed. It's just you have to grade a heavyweight division on a curve, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of like in boxing.
The last 5 years, yes.
They're kind of like you have a teacher in school and she teaches a bunch of different classes, like in high school, and your class is the worst one, so you're graded on a curve. That's kind of heavyweight division. Like all the other classes, they're doing pretty well in school in terms of the teacher, but this one's kind of that delinquent class, right? Like you have to kind of curve your thinking. So your problem kids do well, you got to give them props. I think with David Haye, he did drum up a bunch of promotion. He was a good mouthpiece, similar to Tyson Fury. I think they're both kind of similar in that way. But in terms of mattering in America,
never happened.
I think never happened. But certainly in England.
Yep.
No, he did not.
He never crossed over.
Nope. I guess real quickly, 2 rounds. I guess, I don't know. It's been kind of a slow week in MMA, and I guess we'll kind of discuss this with the UFC Fight Night card. Interesting enough, on a Sunday. And this is kind of more of a question to you. Not really a pet peeve, but everybody's kind of making a lot of noise about the referee stoppages and kind of the scorecards. But how about the humidity, man? It was like a close to 90 degrees. Close to 80 to 90% humidity when the main event happened with Dan Henderson, Shogun Rua. I understand that the last time I remember this happening was in Abu Dhabi, and the UFC's returning there later this year. But I remember the humidity there was terrible for the debacle that was Anderson Silva, Damian Maia. Do you think fighters should be fighting in that severe heat? I think, the glorious case of this was, of course, I think the Rumble in the Jungle with George Foreman and Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And even, I believe Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, they fought in some pretty egregious temperatures as well. But is this really safe for 2 fighters to be fighting close to 90-degree heat? I mean, this is insane, right?
If you ask the combat sports fan in the 70s and 80s, they would tell you, suck it up and go out there. But we're talking about what's supposed to be indoor events, especially nowadays. There's no reason that these guys should fight in environments that feels like they're in the middle of the Amazon. There's absolute no reason for that, especially because of this, Jay. I'll give you this. Fighters' performances obviously are based off of how they do at that moment. So if the weather and the elements become a factor, there's no way you can say that this fight is at the same level or the fighters have the same advantage as they would, let's say, at the Pepsi Center in Denver or, maybe the Forum in Los Angeles, where it's a closed structure. It's well conditioned as far as, the air ventilation within there. It's just not fair to me for fighters to have, the benefits of being in a different building. I mean, they should all be able to fight within the same elements, and it's just unfortunate that, of course, I guess the elements there in the building where they were in Brazil, it couldn't be up to par to where every other fighter fights. It just doesn't make sense to me, and to me, it's not fair for Shogun and Henderson and CB Dalloway and all these guys to have to fight and brave these elements when their counterparts and their contemporaries aren't doing the same here in the United States or Canada. I mean, it's basically almost a slap in the face to them, I think, for them. Okay, he's like, we don't think, especially if the UFC knows this and keeps it in mind, all right, we're not going to have John Jones fight in Brazil because, because of the weather, and we don't want him to be at a disadvantage because we know that venue isn't well ventilated. I guess, I mean, I kind of rambled there, but I hope that made sense as far as...
It did. Yeah. Certainly. It's a bizarre situation in terms of the weather, in terms of just the temperature in the arena. And this seems in 2014 that'd be straightened out. Any thoughts on your mind, Jorge? What's really bugging you this week?
For me, it was mostly, especially I guess now, I went off kind of on the Canadian boxing and MMA scene, but this fight night card that we're having in Albuquerque. So, like as I mentioned, I mean, so far I give it a solid 8 as far as the 4 fights that are actually on here, because we were maybe we're benefiting from the fact that the UFC 174 right after us isn't as loaded yet, because Henderson versus Rustam, I think, is an excellent main event. I mean, you have a former champion and then an up and coming, and I believe I've said it several times, Rustam, if not within the next 2 years, will be champion of that division. For that fight to be taking place, I think it's pretty big here, especially having a number 1 ranked guy and former champion Dotson Moraga, a top 4 fight, meaning based off of the ranking of the two guys. It's pretty good so far. I know, or I hope we get one more big fight just to make this a very good card. So, for the sake of Albuquerque, I hope it's another New Mexican that's put on this card.
Yeah, and I hope the community comes out and supports, which I think they will. I think, especially at Tingley, if like you said, Jorge, they put another New Mexico fighter on here, whether it's Cerrone, Sanchez, trying to think who else, Leonard Garcia. I mean, there's a wide variety of fighters. Even somebody like, I believe, even Julie Kedsey's retired. You know, she does train at Jackson's. You never know. Any one of those fighters, I think the community comes out and supports it pretty easily.
Now, Jay, I wanted to ask you, there's later on within the next few weeks on SW Fight, we're going to talk about the greatest events to ever take place, meaning combat sports ever take place at the Tingley Coliseum. Where were you October 2nd, 1998, when WCW Thunder hit the Tingley Coliseum?
I was mad because I couldn't go see it, probably.
Oh, man, the Giant defeated the Raven. Or Raven, not the Raven. Raven was always an awkward MMA guy, wrestler for me.
Very. You know, I'll tell you, since you brought up the pro wrestling stuff, probably the worst event ever in all of combat sports was, I believe, in 2003, where they had the wedding between, they did the storyline, and I don't know if you can follow wrestling or not, but she was former ECW diva, or I guess manager, or whatever you want to call her, Dawn Marie, and she was in a storyline with Tori Wilson, another female, I wouldn't really call her wrestler, ballet. Yeah, I did. Tori Wilson, for better known people, dated Alex Rodriguez. She was in the WWE before. But anyway, they're in a feud, and I guess the feud was that Dawn Marie was dating and was going to marry Tori Wilson's father, who is, 80, 90 years old. But so I guess the storyline was they had to have the wedding here in Tingley Coliseum on SmackDown. One of the worst episodes of SmackDown ever. So I remember that distinctly when SmackDown came here. Luckily, I did not go to that show, but I think that's the last time they actually had a TV taping here for a wrestling show, was that SmackDown taping years ago. Yeah. But luckily, they've moved on from that.
Very quickly about that Thunder card. I remember my parents didn't let me go to it while all my cousins actually did. But a fight, I'm looking at the card now, Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero wrestled that night.
Ooh, bummer. That sucks.
Another great one. So, all right, let's get off of the wrestling train here.
Yeah, they're going to kill us here, man. Yeah. Let's get to UFC Fight Night 38 real quickly. As we said before, this will be kind of a short show because we're not going to go really deep into it. But I want to discuss the main event here. And maybe this is because of the temperature settings we talked about earlier. When I was watching this fight, I thought, man, Dan Henderson needs to retire. Shogun Rua was just destroying this guy. It seems Dan Henderson was very tired, and he said it himself. He wasn't really active within the first couple of rounds. Round 3, action picked up. Shogun rocked Dan Henderson a couple of times. It almost looked like Shogun was going to finish him, but it seemed like, according to Brian Stan and John Anik, Shogun wanted to pace himself compared to the first bout. But Dan Henderson hit Shogun with the H-bomb in round 3, finishes Shogun violently, 131 of that round. A pretty violent end to a pretty mediocre fight. I don't know, because when I was looking at this fight, Jorge, I was like, man, Dan Henderson, despite winning, I was like, maybe he should call it a day. But after discussing this temperature thing with you, do you think his fatigue and him being tired was more just the circumstances of it being 90 degrees and the humidity, or do you think Dan Henderson is over the hill and needs to kind of reevaluate his career, even though he can knock anybody out in the light heavyweight division.
Would it be weird to say that it might be a combination of both? Just
No.
Because it took him a while. As crazy as the English language is, it took him a while to get warmed up in that hot weather. I mean,
sure.
Yeah. It was just really strange to see him come out slow, and I thought to myself, does Shogun just look phenomenal, or does Dan Henderson just look like crap? I just continuously thought that, and at the end of the fight, when Shogun did get caught, I don't think the punch did catch his nose, right at and actually broke it. Obviously, from what we saw afterward, pretty graphic images of his nose. But
sure.
Is it me, or am I the only one that felt that Dan Henderson could have even squared up a little bit more on that punch? I don't think he landed that punch as flushly as he possibly could, which is scary because it just clearly goes to show that he might not land a punch 100% clean, but even 80-85% of him landing him, he could still knock people out. Like you mentioned, the power is still there and he's still dangerous that way, but as far as, the athleticism overall, it seems to be gone, but I think as long as the power is still there, the UFC is going to give him his shots.
Yeah, and he's it's easy to say he's a draw, but the fight with him and Rashad Evans, it didn't really do so well. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to say he's a draw. He's a notable name. He's a guy that certainly for Daniel Cormier, he's rumored to fight. Daniel Cormier rumored to fight Rafael Cavalcante. To me, him fighting Dan Henderson makes a lot more sense in terms of upping Daniel Cormier's profile. Now, it's a dangerous fight because Dan Henderson could knock him out. But I think in terms of more name recognition and boosting Cormier's profile in the meantime while he's waiting for this title shot, I think that might be the better option to go.
How do you felt Shogun looked? Did you think he looked really good, or did you just think it was a combination of him looking okay and obviously Hendo looking bad early on?
He looked good. I mean, the thing with Shogun is just the wear and tear on his body, man. And it's so amazing that you take a look at Shogun. I mean, I remember when this guy was the young phenom. I mean, this guy, he was John Jones in Pride. I mean, that's basically how you described him. This young phenom, he went on to win the Pride Light Heavyweight Grand Prix with his incredible run. I think he did look good at some points. I think with Shogun, just that whole Brazilian top team mentality of always keeping your chin out there and always taking punishment. Shogun's not going to turn into a fantastic boxer like Bernard Hopkins in there. It's not going to happen. So I think going forward, I think the UFC respects Shogun, and they respect that he got knocked out by Dan Henderson, which could happen to anybody. I think going forward, he's a guy that, again, he's a name that you can put a young guy with. A Phil Davis, certainly a Alexander Gustafsson if he doesn't get his title shot. Certainly some of the other rising parts of that light heavyweight division. Even a Glover Teixeira if he happens to lose to John Jones. But in terms of him being a top contender, I just don't see it happening. Like Dan Henderson, they're both kind of stuck in their ways. With Shogun, unless he drops to 185, I think his days as a top light heavyweight contender are over. Real quickly, man, just to wrap up the show, you mentioned Sergey Kovalev taking on Cedric Agnew. This taking place on HBO. We mentioned last week that Kareem Mayfield was supposed to fight last week. It is actually this week, and he is the co-main event. In terms of Kovalev and Agnew, you mentioned Kovalev is really a rising prospect, a guy that could challenge Adonis Stevenson down the line. In terms of Kovalev, I guess if we're grading him on the kind of Gennady Golovkin, excitement scale, where does he rank?
If let's just say Gennady Golovkin, obviously I don't believe this, but let's say he's a 10 on the entertainment scale.
Sure.
Because he is a heavyweight or a light heavyweight, and light heavyweights aren't as limber as and athletic as they were in the past. Kovalev, maybe a 6 or a 7, just because of when. I'd say a 7. Let's go to give him a solid 7, because this guy his knockout average out of the the 12-round fights. Let's just say it's up. His average fight goes about 3.5 rounds. He will just knock and devastate guys the hell out early on. His last, his last 5 fights: second round, fourth round, third round, third round. It's just unbelievable, and you'll see this consistently throughout the guy's career, just ending people in the first, second, or third round. There have been a few fights that have gone as high as to the 7th round, but he's still stopping these guys. So, I mean, what you can expect Kovalev to knock Agnew the hell out. That's what's going to happen here. This fight's going to end, and it's going to end before the 6th round. He's actually, some casinos have him as high as a 37-1 favorite here, Jay.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
wow.
I mean, this is pretty much, Agnew is a guy that he had to fight to defend this WBO light heavyweight title. So with no fault of Kovalev's of his own that he has to take on Agnew in this fight. But, this is a good way for the American crowd to actually be able to see him. Just because Kovalev's last 2 fights have been in Canada and the UK. He does tend to fight in the New England area a lot before that in his career. But in a sense, this is his coming out party, and, a lot of hype and a lot of media has been catching on to Kovalev because, one, obviously he's the main event this evening, and HBO, as weird as it seems, HBO is just investing in these international guys, and it's going to come back to bite them in the butt, I think. But nonetheless, I mean, he is the main event, and that's why he's getting the hype. And also because of, the hype that his promotion, Main Event, is trying to build off of the fact they feel that Adonis Stevenson is leaving HBO to duck him. So a combination of all that is making Kovalev's name, I guess, trend a little more in the boxing blogosphere. But nonetheless, he does deserve the credit. And, the co-main event, again, Kareem Mayfield against Thomas Delorme. Delorme, a pretty good Puerto Rican prospect. The odds are neck and neck. Kareem Mayfield is a very slight favorite in this fight. And if you've never seen Kareem Mayfield fight, it's controlled street fight violence is what I'd like to call it. Kareem Mayfield is fun to watch just because he goes in there like he wants to knock a bully the hell out. Like, he's a small, scrappy guy, and it is going to be fun to see him and Thomas Delorme go at it. So if you tune into the boxing this weekend, make sure you're tuned in early enough to watch that co-main event, because Kareem Mayfield, one, he's a fun fighter to watch and a funny person. We had him on the show about 3 weeks ago promoting this fight. The guy is hilarious. He is a character and a half.
Yes. Before I let you go, watch Steve Alford hopefully lose in the Sweet 16 to Florida. You mentioned the international fighters that boxing's kind of relying upon. And, you see the MMA, now they're going to have to rely on these new international fighters. Even if, if Glover Teixeira beats John Jones, or even if he doesn't, you have Alexander Gustafsson. You have a lot more international fighters with the international versions of Tough. Who do you think can make these international fighters become stars the quickest? Do you think Top Rank or Golden Boy can pull this off, or do you think the UFC has a chance? Because we've seen Renan Barão be a failure on pay-per-view. Same thing with Jose Aldo. A lot of these, unless they're from Canada, or unless you're American-born, Mexican-American, we've really seen international fighters not become draws. So who do you think has more potential in making stars?
Between the boxing promotions or the UFC, or?
Yeah, just comparing, let's say.
It's tough. I think, the UFC might have a slight edge just because they're actually jumping into those markets and broadcasting fights at a reasonable time here in the United States. But
those fights are on Fight Pass.
Yeah, they are on Fight Pass. I'll give you that. But, I mean, Alexander Gustafsson's name has just, his name recognition has increased 10, 15 times more than it was before when he gave John Jones hell, don't you feel?
Sure.
So I think if they're involved in fights such as that, and just wanted to run this right away about, Top Rank or Golden Boy, I think Golden Boy does an excellent job of promoting their international fighters because, I mean, you have to consider, despite the fact that they're built – a lot of people see U.S. and Mexico as one boxing continent, but Mexico is technically, obviously still considered international. So they do a pretty good job of building these younger Mexican guys. Leo Santa Cruz is one guy that comes to me. Canelo is another guy. So
correct.
Golden Boy, I think, is doing a pretty damn good job of that. But I don't think UFC should be ashamed of the job they're doing in building these guys as an international brand in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Okay, man, I'm going to let you go. Florida's got the lead, so you can go back to worrying about your bracket. Coming up right now, it's going to be the Holly Holm interview. It's about, 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes long you had with Holly Holm, Jorge?
We talk about obviously her upcoming fight against Juliana Warner, April 4th here in Albuquerque, and also just her interest in possibly still going to the UFC despite, talks between her and promoter falling apart.
Okay, so that's coming up right after we're done handling some housekeeping issues. Again, get in touch with Fight Fans Radio through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Ustream. You can always watch the interviews to Holly. If you want to see Holly Holm in video form, you can go to the YouTube page right now, youtube.com/LowBlow505. You can also follow our show on Stitcher, Spreaker, and on iTunes. We're available on social media, Facebook, and on Twitter as well at The Low Blow, and also through email, always lowblow505@gmail.com. So you've been listening to episode 184 of The Low Blow on U.S. Combat Sports, SouthwestFight.com, and Fight Fans Radio. Stay tuned right now for the Holly Holm interview. We will see you next week.
Peace.
Jorge Hernandez with The Low Blow and Southwest Fight News here with Holly Holm. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. You're the main event, Legacy FC30, Route 66 Casino. You're back in Albuquerque for another MMA fight. What's it like to be fighting back home?
Every time I think it's going to be my last one here, we're back here again. So I think it's great. I think that it's, it's been good to be able to be here. And I love fighting in front of Albuquerque. I love the Albuquerque fans, and so it's exciting. And I just want to do my best. And my goal is to try and give a good performance for all the fans.
Yeah. Now, your opponent, Juliana Warner, you have a pretty decent Brazilian fighter in front of you. Do you know a whole lot about her?
I think that she's going to have a pretty well-rounded game. A lot of her highlights are, off of high kicks and knees and things like that, but I'm sure that she's got the ground game and wrestling to go with it. I just expect her to be pretty well-rounded, and, who knows what her game plan is going to be coming into it. She's going to be more focused on trying to take it to the ground or stand up, so just one round at a time.
Now with boxing it was a little different. It was, you didn't have many stablemates fighting with you on a card, but here in this card you have a lot of Jackson's MMA teammates. What's that like to be training at the same time as them? I know the environment just changes in the gym when all you guys are fighting in one card.
The energy's great, and the people, and being able to be, on the same card with teammates is inspiring, and you see them train hard and you think, well, I need to push it harder. And, you're kind of all in the same boat too, so there's some comfort with that when it comes down to fight stresses and things like that. But it's definitely a good energy in the gym.
Yeah, now it's been an interesting few weeks here for you now that you're training, and also there was news of the UFC actually pursuing you. Now, was that much of a distraction during training, or did you just let your manager handle all of it?
I'm just letting them handle it, and a lot of interview requests are coming in, and I'm just telling them as long as it's only about April 4th, I'll do it. And I don't really hear back from a lot of them, and that's okay. I tell them we can just do that after this fight. It's a lot of talk and a lot of drama around it, and if I don't do well April 4th, it's going to kind of make all this talk worth nothing. So it is a little bit, it could be distraction, but it's also motivating because I don't want to be, I want to do well. I don't want to make all the hype about nothing.
Mm-hmm. Now that is the highest pedestal. Do you still hope to get there someday?
Absolutely. It's just talk right now, just negotiations, and that's it. But I wasn't even at the meeting. That's how much I want to take myself out of it right now.
Now, when it does come to Juliana and this fight, you still have, I believe, a couple more fights remaining with Legacy. In the meantime, do you hope to fulfill that contract with them?
Yeah. Legacy's great. They've given great opportunities. The people are great. The opportunities have been great. So I like to continue working with them.
What kind of crowd do you expect on April 4th?
I think it's going to be a fun crowd. I think there's going to be a lot of people there, and I think it's going to be a lot of high energy. Our job is to just make sure and perform it.
Yeah. There's one question I wanted to ask you, especially about your last fight. You, I guess, unfortunately, weren't able to end it, so that took away. You still have a perfect record, but as far as the finishing record, that was gone. Was that disappointing to not achieve that finish?
I don't know. I think anything can help the mental game, and knowing that I've already gone 3 rounds, going into 5, I feel a little better that I've at least done 3. even in boxing, I never counted on a fight to end early just because you never know what's going to happen. And I feel like if you plan on it ending early, then for myself anyway, I feel like I wouldn't be ready mentally for the later rounds if I expected to win in the earlier rounds. And so I just want to be prepared for all 5 and we'll see what happens.
How's Twitter going for you?
I try. It's not my best thing I get into, but I try to at least keep contact with the people out there.
And finally, message all your fans out there.
I just appreciate all the support, and I just want to make you guys proud.
April 4th, Holly Holm versus Juliana Werner, Legacy FC 30, Access TV, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Route 66 Casino. Best of luck.
Thank you very much.